What is up, guys, and welcome back to another video. And today we have 10 of the craziest SpongeBob conspiracy theories out there. Yes, the beloved character SpongeBob has some dirt, some tea that I'm about to expose. Number 10, we have the show is a metaphor for pre-World War II Germany. This theory may seem like a stretch because SpongeBob is known as a show for kids, but just remember that didn't stop the writers from including sexual jokes and inappropriate subliminal messages. Basically, the theory states that Squidward symbolizes Adolf Hitler while SpongeBob symbolizes the Jews. Now, I know that this is difficult to believe, but fans have been digging up similar similarities between Squidward and Hitler. Squidward feels like his artwork is underappreciated, which is similar to Hitler because he also wanted a professional artist, but ended up failing. Also, the Squidville episode perfectly demonstrates how Squidward's dream is to live in a place where sponges and starfish are not welcome. After arriving to Tentacles Acres, Squidward found himself surrounded by residents who all looked and acted just like him. They even lived in houses that were identical to his previous home. SpongeBob and Patrick called Squidward in an attempt to convince him to come back home, but he refused because he didn't want to pass up the chance of being among his own kind. Squidward thought his kind was the best, just like Hitler did. Patrick can be seen as an average German citizen because he lives alongside SpongeBob and Squidward, yet he's completely oblivious to their toxic dynamic. Sandy Cheeks can be seen as America because she wants to free SpongeBob and Squidward the same way America wanted to free the Jews from Hitler's tyranny. Finally, Mr. Krabs can be seen as the rest of Europe because he looks down on Squidward the same way Europe looked down on Germany for its role in World War II. Number 9, the main characters are addicted to a different drug. This theory isn't far-fetched as the last one because some of the writers were probably on drugs while writing SpongeBob, so it wouldn't be much of a surprise if the characters shared a few similar traits with drug addicts. Based on the theory, SpongeBob's hyperactive imagination is similar to the mindset of someone tripping on shrooms. In a blink of an eye, he can go from extreme happiness, which represents a good trip, to complete despair and fear, which represents a bad trip. Mr. Krabs and Mrs. Puff are addicted to heroin because paranoia is a symptom that is usually associated with heroin addicts. Mr. Krabs' paranoia comes from the fact that he's always worried about someone stealing his money and has to keep a close eye on Plankton so he can protect his secret formula. Mrs. Puff has bursts of paranoia when she has to deal with SpongeBob taking his driver's test because she fears that he will crash the boat. The theory goes on to say that Squidward is a heroin addict because his low jaw performance, lack of eye contact, and moodiness can be all attributed to heroin abuse. Patrick is the easiest one to understand because his relatively positive outlook on life and laid-back personality are symptoms of marijuana. Also, marijuana users experience a phenomenon known as the munchies, so that explains why Patrick can literally spend hours and hours eating. There's an episode where he literally vacuumed food. Patrick's definitely on the munchies. Number 8, the Karate Choppers episode is a metaphor for sex. Remember that time Gary caught SpongeBob watching porn, or when Squidward used a vacuum to masturbate? Well, if you believe that's not enough evidence to prove that SpongeBob writers are obsessed with making sexual jokes, then this theory should probably change your mind. In the episode Karate Choppers, every single reference to karate is a metaphor for sex. When SpongeBob entered his pineapple house, he was scared because he felt like Sandy was nearby. When she surprised him, he rushed somewhere out of the screen and returned wearing a karate helmet. Before having a karate battle, SpongeBob pointed at his helmet and said safety first, which represents how men use condoms for protection. Later that day, Sandy was shown in her bedroom when she received a phone call from SpongeBob. He wanted to practice karate with her while they were on the phone, and this is supposed to symbolize phone sex. The theory claims that sex addiction is depicted in the show when SpongeBob became so obsessed with karate that he wasn't even able to focus on his work as a fry cook. Towards the ending of the episode, Mr. Krabs allowed SpongeBob to improve his job performance by using his karate skills with Sandy to make Krabby Patties. They formed a crowd because the sea creatures were impressed with their skill, so this moment basically shows how people enjoy watching porn. Number 7, SpongeBob is suffering from PTSD. The writers led us to believe that SpongeBob wouldn't hurt a fly, but what if he's not as innocent as we think he is? What if he killed sea creatures in the past? This theory states that SpongeBob developed PTSD after spending years witnessing the horrors of war while he was a soldier. SpongeBob was sent back home because his mental health kept getting worse and worse, so he became a fry cook to forget about all the pain he experienced in the war. SpongeBob's over-the-top, joyful personality is a mask that's used to trick his friends into thinking that he was never a soldier and doesn't have PTSD. Just look at the way SpongeBob dresses. He always wears the same clothes, just like a soldier always wears the same uniforms. Every morning, he wakes up at the exact same time, and he needs his giant horn to do so because he had to get used to sleeping with loud noises in his soldier days. His motto is "I'm ready," which is just the kind of thing a soldier would say before deploying. When he's around sea creatures that he views as an authority figure, he behaves just like a soldier. When Mr. Krabs gives him a task, SpongeBob usually responds with "Yes, sir," and sometimes even says "Aye, aye, Captain." Another piece of evidence that supports this theory is SpongeBob's obsession with karate because soldiers have to learn how to fight hand-to-hand combat. Number 6, SpongeBob's friends represent the 7 deadly sins. Look, I know that most people are familiar with this theory, and the last thing that they want to hear is this for the millionth time, but excluding it from the list just wouldn't feel right because it makes perfect sense. According to this theory, Sandy represents pride because she's deeply proud of her hometown, her athletic abilities, and her career as a scientist. Mr. Krabs represents greed because of his willingness to exploit his employees and lie to customers just so he can make a profit. Pearl represents lust because she's depicted as boy crazy. Plankton represents envy because he knows that the Chum Bucket will never be as successful as the Krusty Krabs. Gary represents gluttony because he's constantly eating, except that one time SpongeBob forgot to feed him and he ended up running away. Long story. Squidward represents worth because his anger caused him to hate his life, job, neighbors, and practically everything else in Bikini Bottom. That's kind of sad. And lastly, Patrick represents sloth because he's ridiculously lazy, unemployed, lives under a rock, and is always seen sleeping. He even won an award in the episode Big Pink Loser for doing absolutely nothing longer than anyone else. Pretty impressive. Number 5, the main characters are Marxist symbols. When it comes to SpongeBob, fans love finding a way to connect the show with historical events. This theory analyzes the relationship between the show and communism by identifying some of the main characters as Marxist symbols. Mr. Krabs is obviously the bourgeoisie business owner, I don't know if I said that right, who ruthlessly exploits SpongeBob and Squidward. There's no question that Mr. Krabs is a cruel boss who puts money over his employees. He even attempted to charge his workers for breathing, forced them to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and even traded SpongeBob's soul for 62 cents. SpongeBob and Squidward are the proletariats because they represent the working class who are forced to accept unfair treatment from owners of businesses. There are 2 ways proletariats can react to this awful situation, and SpongeBob and Squidward represent each of them. Squidward is a class-conscious worker. He's fully aware of his miserable situation and dislikes working for Mr. Krabs, which is what caused him to develop his depression and irritable attitude. He followed the Marxist idea when he decided to stand up against the bourgeoisie, I don't know that word guys, I just don't know that word, by quitting in the episode Can You Spare a Dime and going on strike in the episode Squid on Strike. SpongeBob, on the other hand, is the unconscious worker because he remains optimistic despite the fact that his working conditions are terrible. He refuses to see Mr. Krabs' abusive behavior because he has something known as blind obedience to authority. To put it simply, SpongeBob thinks that he will replace Mr. Krabs and become a bourgeois business owner if he continues to be a good employee. I just completely gave up trying to say that word. I'm going to put it on the screen so you guys see what it means. I'm going to put the definition in there too. Number 4, Krabby Patties are made from the meat of Pearl's mother. The SpongeBob trivia book states that Pearl is the biological daughter of Mr. Krabs and a whale he married long before the Help Wanted episode. As he explained in the book, she takes after her mom more than her father, but it still doesn't make any sense that Pearl has absolutely no resemblance to Mr. Krabs. A popular fan theory suggests that Mr. Krabs raised Pearl as if she was his own daughter after stumbling upon her mother's dead body. This makes Mr. Krabs seem like a pretty good dude. But what if he actually had a malicious intent? According to the theory, Mr. Krabs has been using the meat of Pearl's mother as a key ingredient in the Krabby Patties. To back up this theory, a Reddit user argues that sperm whales can easily weigh over 100,000 pounds and their carcass can fuel an entire ecosystem for a long time. Although that's enough whale meat to make a lot of Krabby Patties, it will eventually run out. So Mr. Krabs knew that he had to come up with a contingency plan. The theory claims that Mr. Krabs is patiently waiting for Pearl to go to college so he can execute his evil plan. He's going to tell everyone that his daughter will be dormant in a college that's far away, when in reality, she's going to be butchered, cooked, and served by SpongeBob and Squidward. Absolutely disgusting, bro. Number 3, Mr. Krabs is a cannibal. Similar to the last theory, this one attempts to answer the question everyone's been asking since the first episode of SpongeBob. What's the secret formula to the Krabby Patty? I mean, the ingredient has to be extraordinary because it tastes so good that even someone as miserable as Squidward had a dream of marrying a Krabby Patty, having a child, and growing old together. I know SpongeBob has made most fans dream of one day having a Krabby Patty, but that dream is going to disappear once you hear the story. A Reddit user claims Mr. Krabs has been using other crabs as the key ingredient to Krabby Patties. If you pay close attention, you'll realize that all the food in Bikini Bottom has the key ingredient in the name. For example, kelp shakes are mostly made of kelp. Coral bites are mostly made of coral. So going off of this, wouldn't it make sense to say that the secret ingredient to Krabby Patties is crab meat? When you think about it, there are only a few occasions where we see other crabs, leading fans to believe that Bikini Bottom has a low population of crabs. Plus, the Krusty Krab does look like a crab trap, so it's possible that Mr. Krabs has been luring other crabs into his restaurant for the sole purpose of killing them and using their meat to make more Krabby Patties. Number 2, Bikini Bottom is the result of nuclear testing. This theory is just as popular as the 7 Deadly Sins one, so I'll try to explain it as quickly as possible for those who haven't heard of it yet. Many fans believe that Bikini Bottom resides under Bikini Atoll, a coral reef in the Marshall Islands where the United States did a fair share of nuclear testing in the 40s and 50s. If this were true, it would mean that SpongeBob and his friends are mutations whose bodies and minds have been deformed by the nuclear waste above. What makes this theory so interesting is that the government actually compiled data on the effects of radiation on undersea wildlife following the nuclear testings at Bikini Atoll. As for the evidence, a fan pointed out that the clothing and society more accurately reflects that of the 40s than today. We also see letters that are sent rather than emails. The mutation can also explain how sea creatures are suddenly able to talk and even share a few characteristics with humans. While SpongeBob's voice actor, Tom Kenny, confirmed that Bikini Bottom was named after Bikini Atoll, he doesn't believe that the residents are all mutations due to nuclear radiation. And number 1, Mrs. Puff has a dark backstory. Previously, I mentioned how there's a theory claiming that Mrs. Puff's paranoia comes from her addiction to heroin, but what if it actually comes from something she did years before moving to Bikini Bottom? This theory begins way back in season 2 when Mr. Krabs fell in love with Mrs. Puff and asked SpongeBob to give him advice. SpongeBob revealed that Mrs. Puff had a husband, but she doesn't like talking about him. Now, I know what you're thinking, so what? No one likes talking about their ex. Well, that may be true, but some fans have done a lot of research to conclude that she avoids talking about her husband because she either paid someone to kill him or she did it herself. If you think that Mrs. Puff is not capable of killing someone, then just take a look at all the violent things she's done in Bikini Bottom. In one episode, she ran over a bunch of sea creatures without showing any remorse and obliterated her own boating school while laughing. She's also stolen boats and has been arrested 6 times for her own careless actions, from littering to jury duty ditching. The biggest evidence comes from the episode No Free Rides, which is where Mrs. Puff became so frustrated with SpongeBob constantly failing his driver's test that she decided to just pass him. After thinking about all the sea creatures SpongeBob could kill with his dangerous driving, Mrs. Puff realized that she made a huge mistake. The one sentence that really struck with her in that episode was when Mrs. Puff said, "I'll have to move to a new city, start a new boating school with a new name. No, not again. I've got to end this before it begins." Clearly, Mrs. Puff did something terrible, which explains why she had to move to Bikini Bottom and change her name. If I had to guess, I would say that Mrs. Puff is only paranoid because she knows that it's only a matter of time before someone finds out that she murdered her husband. Case closed. BuzzFeed solved. And that is it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at Valplana, and see you all in the next video.